Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our December What's New and What's Next. I'm Dermot from the Customer Success team, and joining me today, as always, is Matt Kelly, the Product Manager for Me Too. So we want to get into this quite quickly. Matt's got quite a lot to go through for this session. So my job is to get you all onto Me Too to make sure that you can interact with us during the course of the webinar, to answer some polls, as well as to ask some questions when we get to our Q&A section at the end. So please, if you haven't already, access the Me Too app, either the native apps from your stores, or go to web.metoo.com and then enter the meeting ID for the session, which is 142179069. We have got far more people on our webinar than we have got on Me Too so far. So please take the time to actually join up to those instructions there. So what I'm going to do is, we don't have much of an agenda for these sessions. It is pretty much the same every time, but it's, as always, what's new. Then we're going to look at what's next, and then we'll have time for a little bit of Q&A at the end. So like I say, we want you to be sending through all of your questions as we go through the section. So the meeting ID again is 142179069. And I want you all on Me Too because I want to kick off with a bit of a poll, as always, just to get an idea of who we've got on today and how often you attend these sessions. So we've got our poll here. Is this your first What's New and What's Next? Yes, it is. No, you've attended one before, or no, you've attended a few before. So we're really keen to see who's a regular attender of these sessions. We know there are a few that we've already seen on that are some familiar names that we get on them, but we're also really keen to start getting new people on these sessions to get some of that more fresh feedback from people. So we'll give that a couple more seconds before we hand over to Matt, and then yes, Matt, if you just want to close that poll. Oh wow, what a spread. Okay, so almost half of people have attended, quite a few. I think judging by our attendance list today, that's great. But really awesome to see that we've got quite a few new people joining these sessions. So please, take part in them. Send us your feedback in, ask all your questions as well. This really is the forum to put your ideas to Matt, as well as ask him about some stuff that's coming up. So I think there's a good time to actually hand over to Matt.
Thank you, Dermot. So I will try and jump straight in. Normally we run these webinars the day after we release, but we've staggered this one slightly. So we actually did the release, I think it was just over a week or so ago. So hopefully many of you will already have seen and had a little play around with some of these changes. I'll just give you a very quick run through of what we'll be looking at today, and that is our new look dashboard, the addition of a manual filter for word cloud and text questions, and then some updates to the app UI specifically around Q&A. And then, as Dermot said, we'll also be looking at a bit of the what's next as well. So the first thing to look at now, if you just bear with me, I will bring up my browser. First thing for us to look at should be obvious to any long-time users of Me Too, but maybe not so much if you're a new user, and that is the new look to our dashboard. So the main thing to discuss here with this new look is we haven't really made any drastic changes to how the dashboard actually works. All the same features are still there, and the way in which you use them, they'll work in the same way that they used to. We've just given the graphics a little refresh to bring them a bit more in line with our current branding and to give a slightly cleaner and friendlier look. There isn't a great deal for me to actually discuss here, but what I will do is just move through a couple of the screens to see what's changed. Now, we've altered the colors in use slightly. We used to have quite a range of sort of darker blacks, especially on this top bar and on some of these things, and so I say darker blacks and darker greys, I should say. And we've tried to phase those out a little bit just to make it a bit easier on the eye. If I just move on to the Q&A section as well, so we can see here it's a lot of a brighter look than we had before. Just one minor functionality change on the Q&A thing probably to point out, and it is very minor, and this is the adding of our sort of host message or admin message to send out announcements. This used to be a button that you'd press, which would bring up your text entry field, and then you could send it through. But we've made this a standard text entry box now, so it's just quicker and easier to access and send an announcement out to the Q&A board. So again, I'll just whiz through the customized screen. Not a lot drastically changed, just slightly nicer graphics on display. Same with our data tab as well. Now, just to summarize a little bit on what we've done. So, it's just given a slightly different look to the dashboard. We feel we've made improvements, made it easier and more pleasing on the eye. But we haven't just done it for the sake of it. One of the motivators behind this is, in the future, we're going to be phasing in a new dashboard and, altering ways in which the dashboard does work. And rather than wait until that's all ready and put together and push it out in one go, we're going to be gradually releasing improvements in phases. So this first step is focused on bringing in some of the theme and branding design ideas into the UI, so that when we do make future changes, it doesn't all come in one big hit. There'll be more on dashboard updates in the future, and don't worry, when we do make changes, we will be sending out communications in advance so that it doesn't come as a big shock to anybody. Just before I do move on, I do have a very quick poll I would like to ask on this. So just very quickly for you all, what do you think to the changes to the look of the dashboard? Do you like it? Think it's an improvement? No real opinion, good or bad? Maybe you didn't notice it had changed, or maybe you're a new user, you've never actually used the old look, or perhaps you prefer the old look. So please be honest, send in your responses. I think that's probably about it.
I think just while people are doing this, we're really keen to, after this poll is finished, if you've got any additional feedback, please push it into the Q&A board afterwards, and we can take all that content away and talk about it afterwards.
Absolutely. Okay, let's close that right there. Well, that's encouraging. I like it, it's an improvement. Yeah, valid. I think that some people don't necessarily have an opinion. Great to see nobody's put I prefer the old look. But yeah, I mean, as Dermot said, obviously nobody said I prefer the old look, but people obviously do like it, do think it's an improvement. If you do have any comments on it, by all means, send them through to the Q&A, or contact us externally outside of this as well. Okay, so now on to one of the other improvements that we brought into the dashboard, and that is our, oh, sorry, I need to close that right. Sorry. Yes, sorry. One of the other improvements we brought into the dashboard, that is our manual profanity filter for word clouds and text questions. Now, a few releases ago, we brought in our automatic profanity filter. Just to remind you very quickly about that, we have a list of blocked words, which account for most of the single word abusive language in English, which when sent through via the app, it's automatically filtered out. Now we know there's obviously creative people out there, or we don't capture all abusive words, and there's ways that people could still get around that. So we've added a little bit more control to you now with our manual profanity filter. So I'll just show you how that works. Let me just open up a poll from my dashboard here. Now, one thing I should add, this question is just for a bit of fun, demonstration purposes. It could potentially be a question to elicit some harsh responses. So the question up there is, what word would you use to describe the current state of the UK government and Brexit? I can see we've obviously got some responses coming in here. Now, as normal, we can see the responses coming in on the left. Now, we can see we had, oops, let me just close that. Obviously, we've got an abusive word here that's captured by our automatic profanity filter, so that does not get displayed at all. One of the additions we can see over on the right-hand side of the screen is our word frequencies list. So this is just a small addition we've put in. So we can see at the top here, obviously the word rubbish has been submitted 2 times in total. The word shambles also twice. As we go down, obviously sorted by number of instances that word appears. Now, if I see a word I don't like and it hasn't been picked up by our automatic profanity filter, I can just simply select the word. This is probably quite a good one. I'll click on that. We can see it fades it out, and it has now disappeared from this word frequencies list on the right-hand side. And what it does, it will pick up all instances of that word in the list. So I don't need to, keep going through and clicking on the same word multiple times. It will just pick out all instances and remove it. If I just switch to another tab, I think where we have one of our word clouds here. So yeah, for example, we can see one's come here. I probably want to filter that word out. If I were to go back and find it. That is a very good. Yes, there appears to be an issue there with asterisks. That's obviously something for us to look at. Cazzo, I'm not quite sure what cazzo means,
Take it out.
but I'll take it out just in case.
It's definitely an Italian word for something else.
So that's roughly just how the manual profanity filter works. One thing to note, obviously, when I do close the result, close the vote and push those results out there, we can see the results on our audience display here. I can no longer edit those results now. So once we've actually pushed our result out to the audience, we don't let you subsequently manipulate or edit that vote. What I just wanted to quickly move on to as well is the other instance of our text question. So just like with the automatic profanity filter, it works slightly differently when doing a normal text question without a word cloud. So a typical example of this would be people sending in more of a sentence of text rather than just single words. So similarly, again, if I open up this poll, same rules as before. This is just a bit of fun. We might get some harsh responses come in here, but obviously we've got a sensible audience, so I'm not expecting anything too harsh. So we can see the responses come in. Now, I guess the main difference we've got here, let's see, for example, this one, get rid of all those useless gits and start afresh. Maybe I don't like that word git. I will filter that word out. So unlike the previous list, we don't have a word count here. It's just a list showing the words we've filtered out. Now, the difference here, and this is the same for the automatic profanity filter, is when we do filter a word out, we do actually filter out the entire response, not just the word. Obviously, if you take a word out of a sentence, it will start to lose context. So we just make sure we indicate that the whole response is being filtered out, but just telling you what the actual offending word is there as well.
And does that, if you filter that word in that particular question, does that take out all the repeats as well in the same way that it did on the web?
Correct. Yes, it does. So if you're identifying one abusive word, it will find it in all locations. So you can just see by the way that I've demonstrated this. Obviously, I've been looking at my dashboard here, and I can flick through to our audience display screen that I've got there. You can see that obviously I'm using to do this properly. You need a two-screen setup if you are going to be manually editing responses as they come in.
I think an iPad or something to do this filtering is probably a good solution if you were showing something up on the big screen, obviously.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So I'll just close that vote off. I don't think we necessarily need to publish those results. The next thing I just wanted to quickly look at is something we've actually had out a little bit longer. So we did an app update in early November. The release we did then, it was a very small release. It didn't include any dashboard updates. It was just a few app improvements. But the main thing I wanted to just focus on, and you should hopefully all be reasonably familiar with this. If I just bring my app into view, and it's just around the Q&A, how the look and feel of the Q&A board. So you may notice there's some differences here. So we've altered the formatting of this slightly. We have now like a standard sort of grey background. The messages themselves are contained within these sort of white pill-shaped boxes. We have the sender name on there. Obviously, in an anonymous meeting, that's not present. We also have included a timestamp, just obviously showing when the message was sent in. And obviously, as before, we have our likes as well. Now, the major difference is this, the way that you ask a question or send your question through. So previously, I'm not sure if you remember, we used to have a little button, a plus icon you would press to compose a new message. We've altered this slightly to bring it more in line with other apps that people might be familiar with. So we have this constant sort of call to action to ask your question in at the bottom of the screen. Now, one of the reasons around this, we had a bit of feedback. We obviously have our app on multiple platforms. We have Android, iOS, and our web app as well. Now, obviously, these different platforms have different guidelines on how you should do things. I think particularly Apple used to say, having a little plus icon in the top right corner. Android, the guidelines would be, some sort of a floating icon. We had a bit of feedback that people were struggling to find where to compose that message from. So we've introduced this call to action at the bottom where you can start to enter your text and just press send straight away. So hopefully that's a lot more obvious. And the other thing that does allow you to do is you can compose your message whilst still looking at the message board. So previously it was on a whole separate composed screen where you couldn't see the message board behind. So perhaps you're composing a message and see somebody else has already sent that in, so you can stop and don't duplicate and send that through. So that covers the main things that we've brought in recently. Now, if I just get back to where were we? So yeah, this now just gives me a little bit of time to talk about some of the other bits we're currently working on. Now, unfortunately, I haven't got anything in a demonstrable state right now, but I do have a few prototype images I can show. So if you just, again, bear with me, let's see what we can pull up. So just to stress from the outset here, the images that you're going to see here, they're only meant to be indicative. They don't necessarily constitute final designs. But one of the things here that we're currently looking at is expanding our question types. In the future, you can expect to hear a little bit more news on our numeric question type, which allow participants free entry of numeric values. We're also looking at ranking or sorting questions. So think along the lines of pick your top 3 out of this list in priority order, or perhaps something like sort these historical events in order, starting with the earliest. From this mock-up we've got here, you can see we're also looking at the use of imagery for our question types, so bringing the ability to have an image as part of your question. Now, if I just move on to give an indication of how that could potentially look for participants in an app. So this is just a mock-up of how that might look in a rating question. So, adding your image on there. Maybe it's a large image, maybe it's a small image, or potentially maybe we want to start looking at cropping the image and have the ability to zoom in, or give app users the ability to zoom in and look at that. So if I just move on again, so yeah, here we're just looking at some proposals for the numeric style question for participants. So on their app, we've got here, potentially a numeric entry box where you would enter in the value that you want to submit, or maybe it's something more on a sliding scale. We can see we're looking at the inclusion of decimals. And then from a results perspective, how we might display those. So the spread, perhaps, of how the audience has voted, indicating where your vote lies on that spread. The average, maybe correct answer, what the correct answer of that question is, if there is one, of course. Now, I mentioned correct answer a couple of times, I think, and we obviously already have correct answer with our multi-choice question. And that leads us just onto something which is on our roadmap, but perhaps a little bit further away, which is, of course, the scoreboard option for creating quizzes. So that is, something that is in our mind when we're creating these question types, and one of the natural evolutions that we'll move on to after that. Then just the last bit I wanted to touch upon. So obviously earlier at the start, I discussed about the new look of the dashboard and alluded to future changes to the dashboard, and that we'll be doing this in a phased approach. Now, one of the first steps we are working towards is reworking the meeting list screen. This is going to be one of the first areas of the dashboard we can expect to see further changes. We've been listening to bits of feedback, and one of the areas that's been noted on is the general meeting management aspect of the dashboard. So again, just to reiterate what I'm showing here, these designs are indicative. They don't necessarily constitute the final decisions, but it's a work in progress that we're kind of looking at the moment. So we can see here, just looking at potentially a card approach where each meeting is summarized in a small card, giving you a little bit of a summary of what that meeting is. We've got the active meeting, called out and highlighted at the top. This is a meeting that's currently running. We can obviously see where this meeting lies chronologically in our list of meetings, and again, called out so that it looks different. We're aware that it's an active running meeting. And then we have our other cards. Again, just touching on here, perhaps this is one that's finished. A few little stats about what happened in that meeting, maybe number of participants, number of messages. These ones up here, perhaps these are meetings that are still in the creation process. They haven't got any results in them. So we're just showing a bit of a summary of maybe what's on the info screen of that meeting. And again, one of the things that we are going to be looking at and focusing on is, search functions or filtering functions of these meetings. So, potentially the ability to favorite meetings, so we can filter them by ones that have been starred, or maybe we just want to look at meetings that have been finished and completed. And again, search functions, and then also the options to flick between this card view and perhaps just a traditional list view, if you want to manage those. So this is just some of the ideas that we're looking at with the idea of reworking the meeting list. And like I say, that's one of the first areas we're looking at. And then we will be obviously looking at other areas of the dashboard, like for those who have multi-user tenancies, the users tab, and then ultimately getting into the in-meeting stuff. So how you actually create your polls. We will eventually be looking at reworking those as well. That's a very quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things we're working on. I guess now is probably a good time to head over to questions. Dermot,
yeah, we've got quite a few good ones in here, so I'm going to go by the most liked here, see what we can get out. The first one is a ringing endorsement from Rich Foster, saying there's a great dashboard update I used over the last week and happy with them. Good job. So not so much a question, but it's just good to for you and the team to get that feedback. Adrian's asked an interesting question, one that we ask internally quite a lot, so we put that under pressure. What sort of timescale for the dashboard developments? Is it months or years?
Yeah, well, as Dermot said, good question, one that people internally constantly ask me, and I have to diplomatically answer. But we're looking in the terms of months. Like I said, it's a phased approach. We want to be doing reasonably regular updates. We are still gathering feedback. Obviously, what I've shown you here today is just some indicative sort of ideas. We've got plenty of ideas of our own. It's still open for people to put in suggestions and ideas, and that's one thing I do encourage, whether it's through the Q&A or through contacting us externally. If if there's ways that you use the dashboard that you feel could be improved, not necessarily talking about new features on the dashboard, but the way that you navigate, the way that you move around it, please by all means send those in. But in answer to your question there, Adrian, we are looking at months over the course of probably the first half of next year to gradually bring this phased approach through.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. So Pedro has asked, can we choose to hide names and time? So I guess we're looking at that on this on the Q&A board here. Now, obviously, if you're running an anonymous meeting, none of that displays. But I mean, I can answer it. Currently, there's no ability to actually turn off that display. So if you're running an identified meeting, those appear there. But is there anything you want to talk about in terms of some thinkings around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good. Sorry, was that Pedro? Yes, Pedro. Good question there, Pedro. And this is something that we've had. We get quite a lot of requests for about, I guess, minor tweaks, minor changes, these things we want to make. Now, obviously, one of our main focuses has been and always will be simplicity and trying to, get a solution that works for the most people. We're obviously aware that everybody wants to use this in slightly different ways and wants their little tweaks here and there. One of the features that we are looking at the moment, and something obviously that will come with the new dashboard as well, is the idea around kind of administrator settings. So being able to set defaults for all of your meetings from the outset, so that you can perhaps tweak with always having messaging off initially, or having messaging set to be in moderated mode for all newly created meetings. And that's, your suggestion here, that's perhaps something that could fall into that category, the ability to have further tweaks to that message board, like hide names, hide times. I will add that's nothing specifically we've definitively said we want to do, but that is a good suggestion there, and we always welcome what people want to do with this. So we'll certainly put that in our thinking going forward.
Sure. This is potentially, I think, more of a feature request, but it's worth talking about. Adrian's asked there, could you have date created on the card?
Yes. So again, like I said, these cards are not finalised, but one of the discussions we've been having is, what's the order of these cards? Should they be in the order of the date they were created, or maybe they should be in the order of last activity or last accessed, so it's a bit more intuitive. But yeah, I mean, that's something I think we've talked about that perhaps if you were to toggle to the list view, perhaps showing slightly different information there, so you can manage it in a different way. But yeah, great suggestion there, Adrian.
We've got one from Bobby here, Matt. Any plans to introduce demographic breakdowns?
Yes, they are on our roadmap. We've had quite a lot of talks recently about polling and improvements to the polling functionality and offerings that we have. Hence why obviously we're starting work on a couple of new poll types at the moment. I said before, evolving into subsequently scoreboards and quizzes. Demographic breakdowns, that's something that's discussed internally quite a lot. That's come up. That's certainly something we'd be interested in, particularly with the presentation view. Perhaps a way on that display of automatically being able to break one question down by another and see those results live. So it's definitely in our mind, and it's probably on our mid-term roadmap rather than our short-term roadmap. But yes, it's certainly something that we're looking at.
Hopefully that answers that one, Bobby, for you, at least for the time being anyway. Rich has got a good question here. Can you screen for profanities within the Q&A or comments thread?
We don't have the profanity filter that we've got at the moment isn't applied to the Q&A board. Now that's something that we could potentially change in the future and look into if that's something that people want. Now, obviously, we do have the message moderation feature, which kind of caters for that at the moment. So if you are worried about that, we have our set your message or your Q&A board to moderation. So as messages can come in, you can preview them first and then approve them or edit them before they go onto that board. So that's the way of handling that at the moment. However, yes, applying an automatic filter to that is potentially something that we might look to do in the future.
Sure. There's a couple in between here, but I just want to stay on that theme for a moment. This is a question from Adam, as a partner of Me Too's. Will those profanities that you block from the word cloud or publishable questions still appear in the reports?
Yes, they will. So the way it works at the moment, obviously, everything you do on the dashboard, you can obviously see on the dashboard which message you've blocked and hidden away. But yeah, when you run the report, the Excel report, you do get everything that was sent in. So all the abusive words or anything that was sent, you still see that in the report.
And then staying on that thing, there's a lot about a profanity filter here. David's asked, can I turn off the automatic profanity filter?
At present, no. I think the automatic profanity filter, or profanity filtering in general, obviously we started with the automatic filter. We've now introduced this manual filter. Our work doesn't necessarily stop there. We've discussed lots of things. We've got ideas that we want to do with it. The ability to switch it on, switch it off, maybe add your own words to the automatic filter. They're all thoughts for improvements for that feature in our mind. Now, I guess to answer that question, at present, no, you can't do that, but it's part of discussions we've had for improvements on that feature, and we'll definitely add that comment into our notes on that, presuming that's something you want.
I was going to say, hopefully it's one of the questions that just as it possible, because we wouldn't necessarily want to see that stuff live. Adrian, just I think we're getting towards the end of the questions, but he's made a really good point about one of the future question types that you've talked about, Matt. So Adrian's put here, sliders can be difficult to get an accurate figure. Really good point, isn't it?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Adrian. That's something we've discussed when we've looked at creating these poll types. I mean, you'll see, when I showed that example before, I showed a numerical input box where you just, obviously hit in the numbers you want. A slider is something we've looked at, and I think it really depends upon the range that you're setting for the question. So, potentially we might look at something like, if the range of numbers that you're setting is reasonably small, I don't know, 100 points perhaps, or something like that, it could be on a slider. If it's a larger range, finding the little bits in between can be difficult. So perhaps that is something that would not be suited. But again, I think that's a really good point to identify. And we certainly like to hear anybody else's feedback on that. A slider is quite nice to use, but what about if you've got an option of 1,000 numbers on there? It doesn't really work very well. So
yeah, I think something that we're really keen to find out is what sort of ranges do you generally kind of want to ask people about? Is it enter a percentage? Is it are you looking for 1,000-point scale, or is it something smaller? If anyone wants to fire stuff through, we'll speak to us afterwards. We are really keen to get some real life scenarios, because otherwise it's just us coming up with that stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
We've got Pedro's asked, scoring, do we have a date? I think I can safely say Matt doesn't deal an exact date because of the obvious challenges that come with that when he promises you something and then it fails. Are you even willing to throw a...
Yeah, thanks for half answering that for me already, Dermot. Yeah,
set you up.
You're right. It's difficult for us at the moment to put exact dates on things like that. I've said what our sort of progression plan is with regards to that. We've got these couple of question types, poll types that we're looking at the moment, which then obviously evolves into the scoring and scoreboards which come after that. It's on our short-term roadmap. We're looking at it over the course of the next 6 months or so. So we'd be hoping, let's say in 6 months' time, we'd have potentially something, or at least more news on something. Now, I mean, I guess what I would say to that is, keep coming to these What's New webinars. We'll be giving updates, as we go through them. As the polling types improve and come out, that will be indicative of our progress and how we get on there. But yeah, sorry we can't give you a date, but yeah, just to say it's on our short-term roadmap. So 6 months or so.
Thanks, Matt. So there's Dan's put in a good suggestion here. Notches on the slider could help, so that's something we can take away. Bart's asked, can we have an on-off button for surveys? I'm guessing similar to the way we use the Q&A feature on and off.
Yeah, I guess touching on that one. Yeah, good point. I think we've had that come through a couple of times before. I think back to my point I was saying earlier about this idea of these admin settings or something where you can potentially switch features on and off. For perhaps all newly created meetings or something like that. Yeah, that's certainly something we want to look at.
Sure. David just made a good point around the profanity stuff, saying that some words are necessary, example of medical discussion. So I think that's great, and really appreciate you actually putting that in, so we can certainly take that away.
Yeah.
And it gives us good cause behind that. And then Adrian's put a good point here in terms of some other options we've seen where you can use a slider or an open field in combination there.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good. Yeah, I mean that's a good suggestion you've put in there. Yeah, slider and entering the number in together. I think on that that's quite an interesting one for us at the moment. We'd love to actually hear, and obviously Adrian's got a few thoughts that he sent in. On that, love to hear if anybody else has any sort of thoughts or ideas on how they'd like to see that, number entry work. That would be very good, very useful for us.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for answering all of those, Matt. I think we've dried up with the questions for now. We will leave this board open for a while, so please feel free to fire stuff into me too, or as always, get in touch with us at hello@metoo.com, and we'd certainly like to open up a dialogue with anybody who's got some suggestions. So thanks very much. I think that's probably all we've got time for. We've actually gone over our usual time, but that's really good because it was all about the Q&A. So thank you very much for driving that for us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one, which will be in the new year, hopefully not too far into the new year. So thanks very much again, and see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.